Good morning and welcome to AccountingWEB's very first live webinar. I'm Rachel Power, I'm the community correspondent of the site and I'm also today's host. Today's webinar is all about the cloud, so how and why more accountants are adopting the cloud, topics such as data security and basics such as what it is. We have with us today Managing Director of Xero, Gary Turner. Hi Gary, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi Rachel, yes, that's me on the waving their hand. I'm the MD of Xero. I've been with Xero not long after we got set up in the UK for maybe 4 years ago. Prior to that, I spent a bit of time at Microsoft and way back working with accounting software at Pegasus software, one of the old desktop pioneers way back in the late 80s. So I've been in accounting software for quite a while, and happy to come along today and talk about what we're seeing as some of the interesting things that are happening in the cloud.
Brilliant, thanks Gary. We also have Xero Senior Account Manager Glenn Foster. Hi Glenn, would you like to tell us a bit about what a Senior Account Manager does?
Morning Rachel, yes, sure do. So my role at Xero is relatively simple. It's to assist accounting firms to move online. So that's a range of support that we offer to kind of recruit and then to work with the accounting firm to move more of their customers online. I look after about 300 of our UK accounting firms at the minute, ranging from sole practitioners right up to top 10 firms.
Very good. Thanks very much, Glenn. And we also have John Gaunt, who is a Xero using accountant, and he's also Managing Director of FD Works. Would you like to tell us a bit about your practice, John?
Hi, Rachel. My background is I've worked in industry for the last 15 years, large corporates, and I saw there was a real opportunity to start working with smaller businesses, and I saw the cloud as being a key enabler, both from a practice point of view, but also from a client point of view, and the ability for us to be able to collaborate and work with each other throughout the year.
Brilliant, thanks very much John. So just a few housekeeping tips before we move any further. This webinar is supposed to last about 30 minutes with about 10 to 15 minutes at the end for questions from the audience. It is a very interactive webinar, so we'd really like you to get involved. If you look to the right-hand side of the page, you will see a Cover It Live box. If you have any questions, any comments to make, we'll try to get at any time through the webinar. You can put your name and your comment in the box, and we'll try to get back to them throughout the webinar. Of course, if we don't get back to them, we hope to do a later editorial piece which will address some of your questions and concerns. We'll also be running polls throughout the webinar, which we'd really like you to get involved in as well, so keep a lookout for them. They'll be simple yes or no straw polls, so they won't take much of your time. Now that everyone's been introduced and the housekeeping's been run through, I think we should get started. So Gary, you've talked about how more accountants are embracing the cloud and cloud technology, but would you like to talk us through a bit of the basics of cloud? What is cloud?
So cloud, well, first off, it's an unusual name, I guess, and there's no necessary logic as to why it's called the cloud, apart from the fact 20, 30 years ago when businesses were looking at IT infrastructure and they were connecting one location to another one. Diagrammatically, they always depicted that bit in the middle where you were using a telephone connection or some other remote connection. They just drew a cloud, and that was generally the metaphor that was used for the internet or remote communications. And so, in the absence of a better label, that's kind of stuck. And the cloud is it's interesting in the evolutions that it's gone through. So fundamentally, it's about connecting data and processes and software and systems together. It isn't actually that new a phenomenon. If you think back maybe to 1994, 95, when the World Wide Web first emerged on the scene, it took about 2 or 3 years for services like Amazon, for example, is a great example of one of the early online shopping websites to emerge. And that took the notion of a website from just being a static document that you viewed static information on and enabled you to buy things like books online. And Amazon, back in 96, 97, when it emerged, was a great example of one of those early cloud apps. We wouldn't think of it in that way back then, but a website that had buttons on it, and you could search for things, and it had functionality, and you could find books that you wanted to read, and you could order them up, and they'd ship them to you. Around the same time, we saw services like Hotmail. So email's a great example of the early cloud apps, early web apps. So Hotmail emerged around the same time frame as Amazon, and again extended that notion of a static web page and just added a bit more interactivity and persistency in terms of data and usefulness, and the ability to remotely log in and view your email way back in 97, 98, 99 was great, and a huge boon to lots of people. And then we went through another generation, probably about 10 years ago, back in, say, 2003, 2004, when that level of interactivity went up another level, and we saw new cloud and web apps like Flickr coming along and allowing you to upload your photos to the web and to give you real interactivity, like moving things around with a click of a mouse button, and organizing and presenting things in a richer way. And so what's happened is the web started off as a container for static information, and it's just got progressively more sophisticated, to the point that today's cloud applications are hugely responsive. They work like software. There's a high degree of functionality that you can now build into software in a browser. And I guess if you compare where cloud apps are today, they're much more like software that you'd have on your desktop than Amazon was back in 97, when you'd click a button and your screen would refresh and then eventually something would come back up. Cloud apps today are very responsive, feature-wise, certainly as good as most, and better than, in some respects, most desktop software. So it's really been a transition over the last 15 years, and one that we think is really exciting, and has opened up some interesting ways of rethinking how businesses are using, and social as well as a whole lot of consumer things happening, but certainly business as well, and very specifically accounting, which is why we're keen to come along today and have this discussion.
Brilliant. Gary, what we've noticed on AccountingWEB, a lot of members have had questions about apps like Dropbox, for example. What do you think of these apps as a useful tool for accountants?
So Dropbox is a really interesting example of some of the new services that have emerged in the last 5 years. And it also brings up an interesting area in terms of the separation between social and consumer technology, where we're sharing information that's non-commercial, it's potentially private and sensitive in some senses, like photographs of your children and things like that you wouldn't want to share openly. But also, if I'm organizing some kind of social or committee, the ability to share things around my neighborhood or my community on services like Dropbox is really useful, and it doesn't cost anything, so it's attractive in that sense. But things like Dropbox, while they are great for sharing spreadsheets or sharing pictures or files in a trivial sense, I guess that I'd have some questions about how appropriate that is for corporate grade application of that, and specifically in accounting. And so there are lots of services that have emerged, whether that's video conferencing or email or file storage like Dropbox or Google Drive, or some of those new services that have emerged in the last 5 years that are great at a consumer level. And businesses are certainly adopting them, and accounting firms are adopting things like Dropbox. But that's not without it's not without its issues in terms of security and how you're using it and how staff in a practice are using it. And I guess there's a separation there between consumer technology services like Dropbox and more business class services. And another example of a competitor to Dropbox would be Box.net, which provides similar kind of functionality. So sharing files and emails and spreadsheets and documents in a virtual space in the cloud, but in a way that you can control who has access, and It's in the company domain. It's managed by your own IT policies, and is possibly more appropriate than some of the consumer services. So huge value and innovation happening out there. But it's important to make sure you're picking the right tool for the right job, I think.
Thanks, Gary. And John, I have a question for you. Would you use any of these apps, such as Dropbox or Box.net?
Yeah, we use, within FDWorks, we use both Dropbox and Box.net. Typically what we do, we use Dropbox for sharing files and just picking them up when it's not particularly sensitive information, and then we use products like Box.net linked into other applications where we're sharing data which is more sensitive, such as customer documentation, reporting accounts.
Brilliant, thanks, John. Gary, you also mentioned something about client security, which is our next topic. Before we go to that, however, we're going to run a poll amongst our members. So if you look to the Cover It Live box on your right, we're just going to ask you a quick yes or no question. Has a client come to you with data security concerns? So we'll come back to that poll during the question, but for now, Gary, is client data security a big concern for you, or are people right to be worried about it?
So I don't know if I'd use worried to describe it. I think it's a very important area, and it's one that is very easy when we are faced with such a broad selection of new and interesting, exciting services, whether they're on our smartphones or cloud apps or web apps. And it's actually really easy to get set up with these new systems and services, which I guess implies a lack of opportunity to conduct any real diligence on, well, what's behind this app that I'm using. I'm putting potentially sensitive information in there. I'm putting my client's details, my client's financial information, whether that's Dropbox or an accounting app like Xero. It's really easy to do it. And that means that I think sometimes people can shortcut some of the due diligence that we would have done 10 years ago or before the web came along. But it is actually critical, and it's so important that you are validating the integrity of the provider, their capability to look after and safeguard your client's data in a secure way. The viability, the integrity of the service. There's no point. And I think sometimes the debate is boiled down to a rather oversimplified view of, well, is the cloud more or less secure than desktop software? And actually, I think it's actually more complex than that. Security should already be an issue in a practice. You should absolutely be thinking about who has access to client data, where is that information being stored on your local network, never mind whether you're sharing that online. I think it's definitely more acute online because you don't know who's behind the services that you're providing. And so there is a requirement to have certainly more due diligence, asking your vendors, asking the providers, satisfying yourselves that they've got the right people, they've made the right investments in terms of getting great architecture and security, and they're regularly being audited independently, and speak to all the customers as well. So I think security, I think what I was saying, security is hugely important. Don't just sleepwalk into using a service just because it's convenient and it makes lots of nice bold claims on its front page. And absolutely bear in mind that you have a duty of care to your clients to safeguard their data, and that duty of care extends to you asking those tough questions of the providers of services that you're looking at.
Excellent. Well, I think it's a good time to go back and look at the poll we've run. So far, 62% of people have had a client ask of them about data security in the cloud. Glenn, how does this reflect with your experience of working with other accountants?
So I suppose what's quite interesting is we get asked the question a lot less than we did 3 years ago, which I just think is there's broader adoption of the cloud, and more people are familiar with products, and more of the products that we use on a daily basis are moving in that direction because of the benefits around it. But it is a valid concern and a valid question, and we cover that really well on our website, hopefully with the security page. But nevertheless, what we kind of hope when we speak to accounting firms is that we're pretty much specialists in what we do. Data security is a huge part of our business. We do everything humanly possible to ensure that we can provide that. So we hope that actually accounting firms, rather than necessarily security with online being a negative thing, actually hosting data with us is a positive thing, because our security is far greater than a typical accounting firm or small business can ever provide.
Brilliant. Thanks, John. Thanks, Glenn, even. John, I also want to ask you as well about, do clients come to you with security concerns, or they generally?
Yeah, we've had questions from clients around security. Again, for me, it's going back with very similar responses. I have more confidence that the data in the cloud is safer than data in our practice. Our practice could quite easily get broken into. Yes, we try and store it as safely as possible, but at the end of the day, we're not experts, and that's why we've looked to people like Xero.
Brilliant. Thanks for your insight, John. We want to move on to another poll. So we're interested in looking at how many of you out there are using cloud accounting solutions in your practice. So just like the last poll, if you look to your right in the Cover It Live box, you will see a yes or no option. So if you vote for that, we'd really appreciate your insight. So Gary, I have a question for you. Is cloud accounting, you've mentioned it's being increasingly adopted by accountants, but is it just another technology, or is it something more?
I think it certainly was just another technology at one point. There's been so much innovation and so many new things emerged in the last 10 years with the web and with mobile that I guess when it was a nascent technology, it was just another thing you could do with the web, and valuable and useful. I think what has happened, and certainly what we're seeing now, is that whilst it might have emerged as just another technology opportunity, it's very rapidly growing, and certainly in our view, and in my view, after 20 odd years in accounting software, is that absolutely is the way that software and the way that we build and use and collaborate is going. And I don't think there's any question about that. And a really good acid test for that one would be we could decide to set up an accounting software company today, and we absolutely wouldn't choose to build that and ship it on a CD that would only run on a Windows desktop PC. We just wouldn't do that. And if logically we wouldn't do that today, then that means that although the cloud is still early and it's growing, I think over the next 5 or 10 or 15 years, we'll see it fundamentally dilute down the way that we've been using technology. I think the PC era that emerged in 1981, over 30 years ago, was hugely transformational, and it empowered lots of businesses to get going and get their first technology in business and to start automating basic manual tasks. And we thought that was great, and we thought the web kind of came as an offshoot of that. My view, and our view at Xero, is that was really just a warm-up act for the real technology revolution that we're now seeing unfolding with the cloud. And that sounds like a pretty bold and grand statement. But some of the things that we're now beginning to see emerge, some of the ways that we can connect apps together and services and deliver amazing new types of value to small businesses and to accountants, are, we think, transformational. And I think we'll look back in 10 or 15 or 20 years and say 2004, 2005, 2006, that era where the current generation of cloud apps emerged was actually the beginning of the computer revolution. The PC has been great and hugely beneficial, but in comparison with what we will achieve going forward, I think it's huge. And I think specifically accounting and financial data and financial transactions is probably one of the most exciting spaces to apply this new technology to, because we know, and we speak to small businesses and accountants on a regular basis every day, and one of the big problems is unstructured data and the friction and the hassle that accountants and small businesses face, just trying to get hold of where we sit as a business. Are we making any money? Do we have any cash in the bank? Who owes us money? Am I paying enough tax? Am I paying too much tax? All those questions are locked away in unstructured data and pieces of paper and invoices and behind sun visors of cars and in laptop bags. And we see the cloud, specifically as it applies to financial data, even more so than CRM or other lines of business. We think that's huge. We think it will completely change the way that small businesses are running and managing and making decisions, we think.
And Gary, I'd add to that I think it actually enables people to collaborate as well. So we talked about the joining up of systems, but again, I think it provides a massive opportunity for accountants to suddenly start becoming business advisors and really helping to support those businesses.
Yeah.
Excellent, thanks for your insights. I think we'll go back to the poll now and see how many of you are using cloud accounting solutions in your practices. And the poll says 53% are and 47% aren't. So Glenn, how does this reflect? I mean, you work with accountants on a daily basis. How does this reflect on your insights, on your experiences?
So I guess we're finding now that more and more firms are coming on board. So we've kind of moved through, I suppose, that early adoption phase. And we're moving to that next phase where, as it's been adopted more widely, more and more firms are coming on board because they're seeing the benefits just there. So why that's a really interesting stat, 53% of the firms are already using it. It's that kind of 47% that we really now want to get involved with and start to work very closely. So I think over the next few years, we'll really start to see the model kind of develop and grow, and the Xero Partner Program specifically really shoot forward from where it is now. And we're seeing that year on year with the numbers of accounting firms coming on board. We're somewhere in the region of in excess of 1,000 firms now, but there's tens of thousands of firms, probably 20,000 or so in the UK. So that's a huge opportunity for us to hopefully get involved with more and more people that haven't had the opportunity yet to work as closely with us as hopefully we would like and they would like.
I'll add to that and say that I think I mentioned earlier that I think the application of cloud technology and modern software, not just cloud but modern software, to financial data and to small business accounting and is I think one of the most potent applications. What that represents to the small business and all the benefit that the small business would get through running Xero on a cloud or on their smartphone doing invoices, and that's great, and we get great feedback from that. But we also have a separate, very different conversation with accountants, and that there's an historical challenge there where because small businesses haven't been served particularly well by technology, a lot of people still using spreadsheets and manual records and unstructured kind of ways of working. The job of the accountant, the knock-on of that is the job of the accountant is also compromised, and I think in many cases the role of an accountant today, and it's changing, but the role of an accountant today and over the last 20 years has been, let's just get your compliance done. The best I can do is avoid you getting fined for a late filing. We might have a basic tax conversation, but it's too late to sit down and really give you proper any advisory services. There's no point me giving you a P&L 10 months after the end of the financial year to tell you whether you made any money or not. And so the cloud is absolutely impacting both the business and the accountants. I'm not surprised that it's almost 50% of the poll has said that, and we have about 1,000 accounting firms in our program. But I think there are probably 2 or 3 times that in the UK that will have clients on cloud apps, and the accountant doesn't even know about it yet because the client's gone and self-selected. So I think that's interesting, and that certainly bears out our experiences.
Excellent, thanks very much. I think it's time now to move on to the discussion panel. Keeping with the theme of cloud and accountancy practices, John, I'd like to ask you, how has cloud accounting changed your practice, and how are you working within that, and how has it improved or in any other way affected your practice?
For me, coming from industry, it created massive opportunity. So first of all, within our practice, we are pretty streamlined. So we're using some great products. We're using Xero, we're using Workflow Max, we're using Practice Cognition that has streamlined the way that we do things internally so that the admin becomes far less. What that then gives us is greater time to spend with our clients. Being on the cloud and having our clients on the cloud mean that actually we can have some real meaningful conversations throughout the year. We can support those businesses far more. We can identify new income streams for us as a practice, but actually helped those businesses to be more streamlined and use that financial information to great effect. And again, we're starting to see that actually we're using bolt-on applications which support the small businesses from a day-to-day perspective, that actually the finance element of the business is done. So Workflow Max is a great product that we use with a lot of creative businesses. They use it on a day-to-day basis, they send out invoices, and the accounting element is just, it's done. So we're saving massive time, and then we can start to work with businesses and make them more efficient, taking a far more forward-looking view.
Brilliant. Glenn, as you've also mentioned, you do work with accountants on a daily basis, and how does John's experience reflect with accountants you've worked with?
Yeah, I think it's fairly common these days that people are taking a best-of-breed approach to integrating what essentially are the best products in a certain sector and kind of connecting them together in the cloud, which is one of the big benefits, and really building themselves out a streamlined system. And we see it internally in accounting firms using products for themselves to make things easier, but also on the other side of that, building up systems for their clients really to be able to provide them with some really cool tools and some really useful products there just to make their lives so much easier. And hopefully the knock-on effect of this and the strategy and the goal behind the Xero Partner Program and the product is really just to allow accounting firms to be able to service their clients much better. And that sounds a bit, I suppose, slightly arrogant to a certain degree, but it really is just about providing access to that data. The cloud, while being connected to your accountant, is a huge, huge plus. It's about more than that, and the Xero Partner Program hopefully delivers so much value around what we can do with working with accountants. And then you look at, I guess, internally how different firms use a product like Xero or different cloud products, and it's usually one of two directions that they'll go in. It's either they're looking at internal type customers, so brown paper bag jobs, kind of shoebox type customers. Those are what are effectively, I guess, the most inefficient usually in the practice, and probably don't pay you a huge amount. And we're not naive enough to think that you can use a client with Xero and you're going to be able to produce full management reports, and you can take a £400 a year client to a £4,000 a year client. But the strategy and the goal is hopefully to be able to roll out just a little bit more value to those customers, so that maybe we can take 50% of those customers from £400 to £500 or £600 and just start to increase that kind of fee income. The other side we see firms looking at Xero is your typical desktop accounting solutions. So it's a quick win to look at how are those guys that already understand software, they're already working with software, but actually Xero is a bit of fresh air for them and a really useful way for them to go. I suppose if we roll back from where we were in the beginning, firms probably did either or. Now we're seeing accounting firms with in excess of 500 Xero clients. They're doing both really, just to completely streamline it and hopefully revolutionise what they're doing internally, and really starting to roll out and service their clients in the best way they possibly can.
Glenn, I think it's important to kind of point to where that additional revenue from the practice comes from. It comes from being able to make those businesses more efficient, and then because those businesses are more efficient, that's where you can charge a higher fee. It's not just about driving the fee up, it's about supporting those small businesses and helping them be more successful.
Excellent. I have a question for Gary. Gary, are accountancy firms that co-collaborate with the cloud and some desktop products more efficient, or is it more efficient to go completely cloud?
So it's I guess that's a practical consideration. What we see is, and it's really interesting, so we saw lots of, so something like 40,000 businesses are formed every month in the UK at the moment. And we see quite a high incidence of new accounting firms coming on board. And so complete startup practices, firms not unlike John a couple of years back, who come out of industry, see an opportunity to take their skills and apply it in public practice. And for those smaller firms, and specifically for those startup firms, they are absolutely going 100% cloud, because they don't have any incumbent relationships with a legacy software provider. And so a lot of these new startup practices are 100% cloud. I think the number of practices that have made the transition from being desktop-based to 100% cloud are absolutely in the minority today. We certainly know a few of them. But we see it actually as a journey that firms are taking. And if a client's running Sage or running QuickBooks and they've been on it for 10 years, and the accountant's not got the bandwidth to convert all of their clients over to a cloud product straight away, then we're cool with that, and we recognize that will happen progressively. And so I guess the key thing for us and what we see is not necessarily whether they're migrating completely to the cloud overnight, because that's hard to do, it's just a practical challenge, is that in a sense, they've stopped digging. They're no longer investing or putting clients on non-cloud software. All of their new clients are going onto the cloud, and they're progressively in chunks migrating the first most appropriate clients to move across. And increasingly that will dilute down the number of clients that are non-cloud to the ones that are cloud. So I think it'll take 10 years. I don't think it's going to happen overnight. And it's all down to the culture of the practice and to the appetite and how quickly they want to run. It certainly does happen, but you have to be pragmatic about it as well. You can't just do it and flick a switch and be cloud on Monday morning.
Definitely. We also have a couple of questions that we've gathered from the AccountingWEB audience. The first one is data onto the cloud. Do you inform them first?
I'm sorry, Rachel, the connection broke up there. Could you repeat that question, please?
No problem, I can, of course. It's a question for Jonathan. So I was just wondering if, Jonathan, you need to some way inform your clients that you're putting their data on the cloud before you actually do it, or is it not something that you would do?
No, so in terms of what we do at FD Works, we are very upfront in terms of the products that we use and the fact that we're cloud-based, so we openly promote that. And if I'm being honest, it's one of the reasons and they get very, very excited by it. So no, we're completely open, and we tell everyone we use cloud-based products.
And what do you think about this, Glenn? Do you think it's something that accountants should tell their clients that they're putting their data on the cloud, or is there no requirement for it?
To be honest, I guess it depends on their decision internally. So whether you're using data security is data security, whether it's desktop software or whether it's in the cloud. So yeah, the best way we've seen accountants kind of migrate customers over to Xero is usually by way of an event that we would co-run with them, and that's an opportunity then to discuss with the clients about the cloud and security and the processes for moving them from desktop software, Excel, brown bag, or whatever it is. So possibly so. It really depends on the accounting firm, I guess, on how they want to handle that process. But definitely there's an opportunity to certainly be vocal about you're using cloud technology, because small businesses, especially if they're in the tech world or they're certainly relatively, I guess, young and tech savvy, will be really keen to hear that their accountant is a modern accountant, I guess, and really is kind of investing in embracing the newest technologies.
I think I'd add to say that actually it's critical that the client, the whole point about moving your client to the cloud is not to do it in secret, and it's not just for practice benefit. You're doing it to collaborate with the client, and so by dint of the fact that you're doing that, they're in the cloud, and that's a great conversation to have. And so it's not the kind of thing that do we tell them or do we not tell them we're in the cloud. I think if you're thinking about it that way, you're missing the point. The point is get the client and you collaborating in the cloud, get them on a smartphone and kind of taking an active interest in their financial affairs. And the fact that it's in the cloud is implicit And so I think it's entirely up to the accountant to be completely upfront and encourage the client to embrace it, not worry about it.
I think you're potentially missing an opportunity as well if you don't tell the client about being in the cloud. The software looks great, they get really excited about it, but actually there's a real opportunity to start bringing it into their day-to-day life. So applications like Receipt Bank, where you can take a picture of your receipt, that starts to get the clients really excited and gets them wanting to use the cloud.
Brilliant. I think it's time to move on to some questions from the audience right now. So I think this first one might be for Gary, but you can decide who would like to answer it. It's from a guest, and they want to know, what are your views on EU or US safe harbor framework with Dropbox?
So I'll do my. I'm not a lawyer, but I'll do my best to try and throw some light onto the subject. So from a UK perspective, we have pretty tough and great laws in the UK around companies and commercial entities and organisations' obligations to safeguard personally identifiable information, and that's all catered for under our Data Protection Act. And in connection with that, there are then European Union laws and principles that we also in the UK are subject to around sending information around Europe and the safeguards that businesses and organisations have to take, again, for safeguarding personally identifiable information. In 2000, as the web was beginning to emerge and as more and more companies were faced with, well, where are we storing, even if I'm Amazon, to use my earlier example, where am I storing my customer data and their credit card details and order histories? And so there was a treaty called the Safe Harbor Treaty in 2000 that was formed between the US and Europe that basically said if a cloud provider adheres to and is certified under this Safe Harbor Treaty as abiding by the terms of that, European and US government said, we're quite happy for you to base your data in either country. There's adequate security and adherence to the existing data protection rules. So I think it's something that people need to be educated about, definitely. There are some misconceptions out there about, well, should my data be in Europe or not? It's not quite as simple as that, again, unfortunately, because the provision of a web service or a website relies on lots of things, not just where the data resides. It relies on hosting, it relies on other services that are integrated that are also distributed around the world. So your data could be in the UK or in the US or in Europe, but certain aspects of the service may be hosted elsewhere. And so I think that the rule of thumb is, providing it's ask the questions of your suppliers that are their services and provisions certified under the Safe Harbor Treaty, which is the European-US thing, and what are their policies and processes around ensuring that the UK's Information Commissioner, or UK's Information Commissioner, I should say, would be satisfied that the service is respecting UK rights as well.
Brilliant. Thanks very much for that, Gary. We have another question here. We've got two questions actually which link to each other. So one's from a guest and one is from Andrew. So they want us to talk more about the benefit of the cloud for accountants, and could we hear more about business uses, particularly in accountancy? Who would like to take this question?
You can have that one, go on.
Oh, thank you, Gary. So I guess, so talking with accounting firms, there's a number of different ways that they would use a product like Xero. So some would use it for those typical internal bookkeeping type customers, and there can be huge efficiencies around having automated feeds or file imports of getting data into a bookkeeping system and using that to speed up those processes. Some firms then use it for internal type compliance jobs. So typically, you know, those guys that turn up at the end of the year with all of their information, and quite often a few of them turn up at the same time and drop it all in and help to kind of streamline that process and spread that workload out across the year. And that's a really useful way of engaging more often with those clients, which we found to be really useful. The other side is looking at how, I guess, accounting firms use the full version of Xero to really start to work with their clients and offer more value-added advice and be able to see what's going on a daily basis. So we see with accounting firms that they're using lots and lots of different ways to work with different clients, which is fantastic to use essentially one product, that is Xero, to service effectively your whole client base if you should choose to do that.
I think from the other part of the question, I think related to what are the benefits from an accounting perspective, and I guess so when we first put our product on the marketplace, there were lots of things it didn't do, and we iterate and add functionality, and cloud software it lends itself particularly well to that. That we quickly caught up with the functional capability of packages that people would already have been using. And so if you're using existing desktop accounting software, pretty much you can transition to the cloud now and get at least what you had before. But what we're seeing now is new things emerging. So a couple of examples of that is that we've got some really great bank feed integration into our product. And so we have over 20,000 businesses in the UK now, and something like 75% of them are automatically pumping in their bank statement data on a daily basis to aid with the job of keeping on top of their cash flow and bank reconciliation, and just giving them clarity and visibility. And that's something that hasn't really been around before. We're seeing some really interesting things around doing online invoicing and sending really beautiful looking invoices to people that isn't in a PDF attachment on an email, but is actually rendered in the web, and it's got interactivity that I can download the copy of the invoice, I can look at all my past invoices. So we're seeing micro businesses providing quite sophisticated customer portals to their clients out of a consumer price point accounting product, then you would never have conceived of doing something like that even in a mid-size product. So I think there's a trend where now that cloud apps have got established and they've kind of earned the right to be taken seriously and credibly as great products and functional, they're now doing things that accounting software didn't do in the past.
Businesses can start to be a lot more kind of structured, and they can look at the type of processes that they're running, and 9 times out of 10 there's an application out there which either they've got an existing application which is embedded within their business that they can start to link up with Xero. So taking CSV type files and joining the two together. We're starting to see people really kind of question the way they're doing.
Okay, so we only have about 5 minutes left, I think, so we'll take 1 or 2 more questions. Okay, I have one here from a guest again. Do you have a view on broadband speed that users require for Xero or other cloud packages? So who wants to take this question?
I'll take that one. I think I don't know what the statistic is, and it's kind of nonsensical anyway, because it's something like 97 or 98% of everybody in the UK has at least basic broadband speed. But that's kind of irrelevant if you're in that 2% that isn't in, or you're a kind of communications black spot. So I think the reality is there will be people that will struggle because they just don't have great broadband. But that number is diminishing all the time. And I think there's also possibly a misconception that you need lots and lots of broadband to run a web app. And actually, you don't. A web app is just like any other browser page. You can run it on your phone, or you can run it on the slowest of broadband speeds and still get a great experience. So I think the question is, if you've got broadband, you're fine. The question is that there are certainly people, the more kind of outlier areas of the country that will struggle, but that's something that the communication industry is slowly but surely fixing up. But you don't need much at all to use a cloud product.
Okay, thanks, Gary. We're just going to have one final question before we end, and this is for John. It's from Andrew. John, is it difficult to get clients to start using Xero?
I think it's more once they see Xero, and if you can show them what it can do, I think very, very quickly they will adopt the product. I think it makes life so much easier. It's not scary, it's simple to use. So for me, it's about the demonstration, showing them what it can do, but then showing them how they could use it by adding additional products that change the way they do their day-to-day business.
Brilliant. Thanks very much for that, John. I'm afraid this is all we have time for. As we mentioned at the very start of the webinar, if we haven't gotten to your question, we've had very numerous questions, so thank you so much for your interaction. But if we haven't got to your question, we can always come back in a later editorial piece and try and address some of them. This webinar will be available from now on this page, on our YouTube page, and on our Google Hangouts page. So you can watch it again at any time. I'd like to thank my 3 panelists very much for joining us here today. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you. It's been a bit of a white knuckle ride, pioneering live webcasts, not without its glitches, but it's been good fun.
Brilliant. Thank you, and thank you very much, John.
Thank you.